When you walk into this office and the first thing you see is me smiling back at you with a big old smile, I bet you wonder why I'm the receptionist at a plastic surgeon's office. And that's a fair question. I sometimes wonder that myself. I'm Maggie, and I've been working at Dr. Harrison's clinic for about 3 years now. One thing to know about me is that I am no supermodel. I'm a little overweight. I like to use my mom's phrase of tastefully plump. But my whole life, I've always been comfortable with who I am. I've never let anyone's words get to me, and as such, when I applied to work here, I fully expected to get rejected. But I needed a job and was willing to try for this spot. Meeting Dr. James Harrison was like coming face to face with a perfect work of art hung up in an art museum. His skin is flawless and smooth without a single mark or imperfection. While a little messy, his brown hair is soft and silky, and those beautiful eyes. He has eyes that are so bright green you could swear that they were glowing. I was so intimidated when I met him for an interview for the position, and his gaze was so intense I almost felt like he would reject me on the spot. But instead, he gave me a happy smile and began to make conversation with me. And before I knew it, I was the receptionist here. Dr. Harrison is booked full almost constantly, and the flood of people that come in once we open our doors is insane. I swear there's a line at the door when I go to open it once we're finally open. Plenty of women and men check in and eagerly await their turn to be with Dr. Harrison. My job boils down to answering the phone, booking appointments, confirming appointments, dealing with payments, and the occasional coffee run. The waiting room sort of resembles a hotel lobby with how big it is, and to my knowledge, besides Nurse Rachel, it's only Dr. Harrison doing all the work. I don't think Rachel likes me very much, unfortunately. When I started my first day of work, the look she gave me was one I gave some food I discovered in the back of the fridge that I'd forgotten about. A mix of disgust and annoyance is the best guess I can give. Rachel also has flawless skin and hair, and she looks like she leapt out of the pages of a magazine. She only seems to tolerate me because I'm so close to Dr. Harrison. But when she arrives at work before him, she lets me know how much she hates me. Unlike her, though, I don't have time to hate her. Especially since the phones are usually ringing off the hook with people looking to book appointments with us. Speaking of phones, there's also this old-fashioned rotary phone located in the back of my little receptionist area. Dr. Harrison has given me explicit orders that if it ever rings, I am to ignore all other calls and focus completely on answering that phone. So far, that phone hasn't ever rung, and it just sits there ominously on the wall. When I say old-fashioned, I mean old. That thing looks like it jumped right out of an old black and white movie. I even had to ask him how I was supposed to answer it. Dr. Harrison let me decorate my reception desk however I liked, so I naturally brought all the knickknacks I could to the office. I'm a simple girl with simple tastes. I decorate the desk according to the season and the upcoming holiday, from Halloween decorations like pumpkins and skeletons to Christmas decorations like my little tree and various stockings. But normally I just like to have pictures of my dog Sunny and a few pictures of my family. Well, I wouldn't be here on this site if strange things didn't happen at Dr. Harrison's office, now would I? Well, I have some stories to tell you folks. The first major red flag about this place is just how enthusiastic, let's say, the patients are. Once when I was trying to tell someone that they didn't have an appointment and that the next opening would be in 6 months, she very nearly leapt over the desk, separating us, and started strangling me right there. It took a couple of the other patients to restrain her and for the cops to take her away. But that wasn't an isolated case, and things like that happen nearly every day here. Another thing about the patients is how, I don't want to say bad, but how worse they eventually start to become. While we have so many patients, they all start to blur together, and I do sometimes keep tabs on some of them. And as they progress, they become more plastic-looking almost. They start to resemble those botched plastic surgery stories you see online, and I don't understand how. When they come here at first, they seem flawless, just like Dr. Harrison and Rachel. But slowly, they become more and more plastic. And eventually, some of them just stop coming. When I asked Dr. Harrison about it, he quickly shrugged it off, telling me he simply forwarded them to a specialist who treats conditions like that. I remain unconvinced, though. Then there was the incident that made me want to tell someone about the strange things going on around here. I am usually the first to arrive at the office. I must unlock the door and turn the alarms off. Once that is done, I usually finish off any remaining paperwork from the previous day and start on the paperwork for that day. Normally, right after I come in and turn on the lights and turn off the alarms, Dr. Harrison comes in right after me. But on this day, he was running late, and that is rare for him. He is normally very punctual, and when I saw Rachel had gotten here before him, I started to get a little worried, mostly about what the patient scheduled for today would do if we had to cancel their appointments. Already, I could see the line of them starting outside our doors. When the first phone started ringing, I nervously grabbed it and fully expected it to be another patient arguing with me about an appointment. "Thank you for calling Dr. Harrison's office. This is Maggie. How can I help you?" I answered with the cookie-cutter opening I always made when someone called the office. To my surprise, it was Dr. Harrison calling me. "Maggie, something came up. Tell Rachel to prepare the first patient immediately after you guys open for me. We're going to need to start it as soon as I arrive, understand?" he asked me, talking so fast I had to focus on what he was saying to understand any of it. "Of course, sir. Are you all right?" I asked him as I stood up from my chair and got ready to talk to Rachel. "I am fine. Just make sure Rachel sets everything up properly. I'll be there soon." He hung up without even a goodbye, which upset me a little. It was the first time since I started working there that he had not said bye to me. But I chalked it up to his rushing and placed the receiver back onto the phone dock. I took a deep breath and stepped back through the reception area and towards the consultation offices, where Rachel was probably getting everything ready. I entered the room she was prepping and met her judgmental gaze head-on. "Dr. Harrison just called me. He says to prepare the first patient immediately after I open, and that you guys are going to start as soon as he gets here." The look she gave me quickly turned into one of urgency and a little bit of fear. I told him we should have done that yesterday. This is just great. She grunted, tossing her pen at the floor and walking past me, bumping into my shoulder, and stepping away down the hall towards the medical closet. Rubbing my shoulder and sticking my tongue out at her, I walked back over to my desk and finished up my preparations to open. And at 9 o'clock on the dot, I walked over and unlocked the front door for the patients, quickly jumping out of the way so I didn't get trampled by all of them rushing in. Taking my place back at the desk, I sat down and looked up at the first patient who had managed to get to my desk to check in first. "Name, please?" I asked her as I checked my computer to see if she had an appointment. "Kara Smith," she told me. I could tell she was a regular since she acted like I should know her personally, and immediately upon seeing her. Little did she know I saw at least 100 people a day. I checked her name and scrolled around on the page before I found her. She was here for a rhinoplasty. I took another look at her and slightly raised my eyebrow. Her nose looked fine to me, but I wasn't exactly allowed to say that to the patients. "Okay, you can go right ahead. Nurse Rachel will be there to meet with you. Dr. Harrison is running a little late today, so I do apologize for that, but he should be here soon," I told her with a smile. She returned my niceties by cussing me out and stomping over towards the door to the consultation rooms where Nurse Rachel was waiting for her. One of the better interactions I've had. I kept checking people in and turning away the ones who didn't have appointments. Usually, if they got too rowdy, a little flash of my pepper spray was enough to get them to go away. After about an hour of being open, with patients starting to grumble, Dr. Harrison burst through the front doors and quickly ran past everyone, including me. I normally only ever saw him in his doctor coat and scrubs, so seeing him running in with a jacket and a scarf was interesting, especially since it was the middle of summer. He was so well covered that I almost didn't recognize him. The only thing that told me it was Dr. Harrison were those beautiful, big green eyes. He quickly made his way toward the consultation rooms and slammed the door shut behind him. I had to stop a few of the patients from trying to follow after him, getting them to sit back down in their seats. I took my seat and started answering calls, occasionally looking out into the waiting room to make sure everyone was behaving themselves. Everything had settled down when a blood-curdling screech came from one of the rooms. I quickly stood up and ran over to make sure everything was okay. "Dr. Harrison, is everything okay?" I asked as I knocked on the door. To my surprise, the door hadn't properly locked. Dr. Harrison must have been in such a hurry that he neglected to close it properly behind him. When I knocked, it swung open slightly, revealing what was going on inside. Kara was strapped to a table while Nurse Rachel desperately tried to pin her down. Dr. Harrison loomed over her, holding a scalpel. He twisted his head around to look at me, and those shining green eyes almost burned holes into my retinas. "Close the door, Maggie," he ordered, his normally calm and joyful voice replaced with one of rage and annoyance. I quickly obeyed and slammed the door shut, my legs trembling as I stood out in the hallway. Because what I also saw on the table was Dr. Harrison slicing a good half of Kara's face off with that scalpel. A surgeon's mask covered his face, and his scrubs were completely drenched in blood. I felt queasy as I walked back to my desk and took my seat. I was shaken up pretty badly, and I tried to convince myself that what I'd seen wasn't real. I'd probably just imagined it. It had only been a glance, and there was no way Dr. Harrison would do something so horrible to a patient. After about an hour, Kara came out of the operating room, wrapped in bandages all over her face, but with a bright smile. She was thanking Dr. Harrison 1,000 times for his work. He brushed it all aside and handed her a few papers to bring over to me. She walked up to my desk, and I looked over the papers, nodding to her. "Everything okay?" I asked, as I signed off on the papers I needed to sign for her and presented the ones she needed to sign. "Everything is fantastic. Thank you so much for asking. I just know this nose job will be the one," she said with a smile through the bandages that covered up her nose. I squinted at her, trying to look at where I had sworn her skin had been sliced off, but there wasn't anything there. Not even an acne scar. She didn't seem to notice my staring, too focused on signing her papers. With that, she walked away, and the next few patients began to be admitted, while I continued dealing with the steady flow of people entering the waiting room, begging and pleading with me to get them an appointment. Around noon, I started packing up and getting ready for lunch when I noticed on the schedule that I'd have lunch at the same time as Dr. Harrison. Normally I'd ask him if he wanted something delivered, but I figured it was best to leave him be for the time being. As I stood up and got ready, I turned around and found him standing right behind me. He scared the absolute hell out of me, and I dropped my purse to the ground in shock. He seemed just as surprised and quickly bent over to help me pick it up off the floor. "I'm sorry about yelling at you, Maggie," he said, handing my purse back to me. His face was uncovered from his surgeon mask, and his beautiful face was again exposed to me. I could tell, by looking into those big green eyes, that he truly meant his apology. "Oh, that's okay, Dr. Harrison. I understand that sometimes you just have a pretty bad day, and you can't help but get grumpy. Can I get you anything for lunch while I'm out?" I asked, happy that we could continue our routine just like normal. The genuine smile he gave me further reinforced that we had both forgiven each other. "Just some coffee for now will be fine." "Enjoy your lunch, Maggie," he told me with a smile before turning and heading back to the rooms behind the reception area. I shouldered my purse and headed to exit the waiting room, stepping out into the parking lot. And as I did, I was quickly shoved to the ground by an unseen force. "What the fuck did he do to me?" Kara's voice screamed as she grabbed me up from off the floor and shook me violently back and forth. It took me a moment to figure out what she was even screaming about. And that's when I saw it. Her face was starting to peel off. It looked like she had tried to take the bandages off too early, and a large chunk of skin had followed. I don't know, ma'am. I'm just the receptionist." I tried to explain, but the look in her eyes told me she wasn't going to accept that as an answer. She quickly wrapped her hands around my throat and started squeezing as hard as she could. I gagged, frantically searching for my pepper spray, only to realize, with horror, that my bag was still on the floor where she had shoved me down. "Kara, can I please ask you to let my receptionist go?" "Doctor?" Harrison's voice cut through the scuffle. Both of us turned to see him standing just outside the clinic doors. Upon meeting his gaze, Kara carefully released me and stepped back, allowing me to quickly run over to Dr. Harrison. "I'm so sorry, doctor. It's just, I ruined your hard work and I couldn't control myself," she whimpered, pointing to the chunk of skin hanging off her cheek. Dr. Harrison looked me over to make sure I was okay. I nodded, and he then walked over to Kara to examine her injury. "You removed the bandages too quickly. I told you to wait at least 5 days," he said with a tsk, grabbing the loose chunk of skin and ripping it right off her cheek. She didn't even flinch, standing there completely enraptured by him. "Go ahead and head back inside. Rachel will see what she can do to fix you," he said, moving out of her way as she obediently walked back toward the clinic. "Sir?" I asked him, confused and honestly upset that this was happening again. "I don't know if I can keep doing this. I was really starting to feel like it wasn't safe to be here." He looked over at me with those big green puppy eyes, and I immediately felt guilty for even thinking about quitting. "Please don't quit, Maggie. You do so much to make this office better, and I couldn't stand to see you leave. Please, I'll even give you a raise if you stay," he begged, stepping closer and taking my hands into his own. It was the first time I'd ever held his hands without him wearing gloves. They were soft and inviting, but I still wasn't sure if I could stay, although the thought of a raise was very tempting. "Can we at least look into getting security, please?" I asked, looking into his shining green eyes. He smiled wide and nodded eagerly. "Of course, I'll look into it right away and I'll make sure this never happens again." I swear to you, he was so excited that I was thinking about staying that it melted my heart. He finally let me go to get my lunch, and over some burgers I figured I might as well stay. If not for the money, then at least to keep seeing him smile like that again. On my return, I dropped off his coffee as he was in the middle of a consultation. He thanked me as I exited the room. As I walked past another room, I noticed someone inside, which was strange because I had just seen Rachel leave for lunch as I arrived. Curious, I poked my head into the room and quickly pulled it back out, shutting the door behind me. I had just walked into a room with a skinless corpse lying on the table. Only a few patches of skin remained, and it looked more like a carcass you'd find in a butcher shop. I walked back to my desk, shaking my head, trying to convince myself that I hadn't just seen what I thought I had. Maybe it was one of those anatomical skeletons? I reached over to the lost and found box, hoping something in there could distract me. I picked up a stress ball and squeezed it as hard as I could. Not to get off topic, but I'm sure someone's been stealing things from the lost and found. Every time I take inventory, a couple of things seem to be missing. Anyway, my curiosity got the best of me. I stood up from my desk and walked back to that room. I stared at the door for a moment, my hand trembling slightly as I reached for the knob and turned it open. To my surprise, shock, and confusion, the room was completely empty. I pushed the door open fully and stepped inside, looking around, trying to find any evidence that someone or something had been here. That's when I was tackled from behind and pinned to the floor. I screamed, thrashing about in complete terror. I turned my head to see who was attacking me, and my screams grew louder when I saw that it was the skinless Kara. "What have you done to me?" She screamed at me, which made me scream even louder at the sight of her bleeding, skinless body. She flipped me over with a loud grunt, wrapping her hands around my throat and squeezing with all her strength. I gagged, desperately reaching out to stop her. My hands pressed against her soft, squishy form, but because she was coated in blood, her skin was slick to the touch. Just when I thought I was going to die on the floor like this, I heard 2 pairs of footsteps rush in and tackle Kara to the ground. I gasped for air, panting as I struggled to breathe. As my vision slowly cleared, I was both thankful and surprised to see Dr. Harrison's beautiful face staring down at me. "Are you all right, Maggie?" he asked, his voice filled with genuine concern. His soft, soothing tone washed over me, and as I looked into his glowing green eyes, I felt an immediate sense of relief and even pleasure. "I'm all right, sir," I croaked, sitting up from the floor. my throat burning with every word. He quickly examined me and seemed satisfied that I was okay. Then, he turned his attention to the thrashing, skinless body that Rachel was busy holding face down on the floor. "Maggie, please leave this to us. Just keep the waiting room civil while Rachel and I deal with this," Dr. Harrison told me, his eyes glowing again. I could have sworn I saw swirls in his pupils. I nodded carefully and exited the room. I quickly ran to the bathroom and vomited up everything I had eaten that day. The moment I broke eye contact with Dr. Harrison, everything came rushing back to me, and I had a full-blown panic attack in the bathroom. It took me a while to compose myself before I finally returned to the front desk. Don't get me wrong, I know all the weird shit happening here isn't normal, and it scares the hell out of me. But Dr. Harrison did give me a raise. A big one. And soon, we're gonna get security to help me out with the more outlandish patients. So maybe I can just ignore the stranger things that happen here, right?